Hey there, sleepy thinkers. Tonight, we're going to drift together into one of those impossible stories, the kind that feels like a dream within a dream, where time itself becomes fluid and strange. What if you had built the perfect time machine? Not the gleaming chrome contraption from old movies, but something quiet and gentle, a soft bubble of displaced reality that could carry you anywhere in Earth's long, winding history. You'd plan to visit the Renaissance, maybe walk through ancient libraries, witness the first flowers blooming in peaceful meadows. But what if, on your very first journey, something went terribly, beautifully wrong? What if your time machine broke at the worst possible moment? Not just once, but again and again, casting you like a leaf on the wind through the most alien, most hostile periods our planet has ever known. What if you found yourself not in the gentle past you'd imagined, but in worlds so strange they might as well be different planets entirely? Tonight, as you settle into sleep, let yourself drift with me through these impossible moments. Don't worry about understanding everything. Just let the strangeness wash over you like waves of warm, dark water. Let yourself float through deep time, where nothing is familiar, where every breath is different, where the very air tastes of ages you were never meant to witness. Close your eyes now. Feel yourself sinking back, not just into your bed, but into time itself. The machine is humming softly around you, its broken mechanisms casting you forward and backward through eons like a stone, skipping across the surface of eternity. And in that gentle darkness, our story begins. You are floating in your time machine, and something is wrong. The soft blue glow that should be steady is flickering now, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. The controls that once responded to your gentle touch have gone cold and unresponsive. Through the translucent walls of your temporal bubble, the streaming colors of time, those beautiful auroras of passing centuries, are moving too fast, spinning wildly out of control. You were supposed to arrive in Renaissance Florence. You had imagined cobblestone streets warm under morning sun, the smell of fresh bread, the gentle murmur of Italian voices discussing art and philosophy. Instead, the machine shudders around you like a ship in a storm, and the colors outside grow darker, stranger, more primal. The numbers on your temporal display are spinning backwards so quickly they blur into meaningless streaks of light. 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000, 100,000. The digits cascade like falling stars, each one carrying you further from everything you know, everything safe and familiar. And then, with a sound like sighing, like the universe itself exhaling in resignation, your machine comes to rest. The first thing you notice is the heat. It strikes you like a physical blow the moment your protective bubble dissolves, a wave of scalding air that tastes of sulfur and ash and something deeper, something that speaks of death on a scale you cannot comprehend. The temperature gauge, still flickering weakly in your broken machine, reads numbers that shouldn't exist. 50 degrees Celsius, 60 in the shade, if shade could even be found in this hellscape. You are standing in the early Triassic, though you don't know this yet. All you know is that you have arrived in hell. The landscape stretches before you like the surface of an alien world, vast and empty and utterly hostile to life. Where you expected to find forests, cities, any sign of the green and living world you know, there is only desert, endless, wind-carved desert that extends to every horizon. The sand beneath your feet is not the clean white sand of beaches you remember, but something darker, stained with minerals and the chemical ghosts of catastrophe. The air itself feels wrong in your lungs. Each breath is an effort, thick with carbon dioxide at levels that make your head swim and your heart race. This is air from an Earth where the very atmosphere has turned traitor, where the sky holds 3 times more CO2 than the world you left behind. Your body evolved for different air, different pressures, different compositions of gases, struggles to process what you're asking it to breathe. But it's not just the heat and the poisoned air that makes this place feel like the end of the world. It's the silence. This is the silence that follows the greatest catastrophe our planet has ever known. 96% of all marine species, 70% of all terrestrial life, gone, erased. The great dying, scientists will one day call it, though in this moment, you know only that you stand in a world where almost everything that once lived has been reduced to chemical traces in rock layers you cannot see. The sun above you burns with a malevolent intensity, its light unfiltered by the green things that should be growing everywhere, untempered by the water cycle that should be carrying moisture and coolness across continents. Instead, there are only these endless dunes, sculpted by winds that taste of extinction. You try to return to your machine, to escape this desolation, but the controls remain dark and cold. The temporal fields that brought you here have dissipated like morning mist, leaving you stranded in this moment of Earth's agony. For now, all you can do is exist here, breathing the difficult air, feeling the hostile sun on your skin, learning what it means to stand in a world that has forgotten how to sustain life. As you look across this barren expanse, you begin to understand something profound about time, about the delicate balance that allows your own green world to exist. This is not just the past. This is a warning, a glimpse of how quickly paradise can become wasteland, how thin the line is between the world that nurtures life and the world that erases it. The wind shifts, bringing with it the distant sound of sandstorms building on the horizon, great walls of dust and debris that will soon sweep across this emptiness like the breath of sleeping giants. You pull your clothes closer around you, though they offer little protection against this heat, and prepare to wait. Because somewhere in the broken machinery behind you, quantum fields are slowly rebuilding themselves, preparing to cast you onward through time once again. You don't know this yet, but this is only the beginning. Your machine will heal itself just enough to tear you away from this place, only to break again, only to strand you in yet another of Earth's most impossible moments. The desert around you shimmers with heat mirages, creating the illusion of water where no water can exist. It's beautiful in its way, this world of mineral and wind, an endless sky. Beautiful and terrible and completely, utterly alien to everything your species knows about what it means to be alive. As the distant rumble of storms grows closer, you close your eyes and try to remember the world you came from. Green grass, cool rain, the sound of birds singing in trees that have learned to trust the sky. These memories feel like dreams now, like stories told by someone else, about a planet that might not even exist. But they do exist, these green dreams. They exist in a future that is already ancient by the time you arrive in this wasteland. A future where life will have learned once again to fill every possible space with growth and motion and the patient work of healing. Your own world, with all its complexity and abundance, is the descendant of this desolation. Proof that even the most complete endings can become beginnings. The wind rises, carrying sand that stings your face and fills your mouth with the taste of deep time. Soon, you know, your machine will stir again. Its broken heart will beat once more, and you will be carried away from this place to another impossibility. Another moment when Earth wore a face you would never recognize. Until then, you wait in the heat and the silence, learning patience from a world that has already waited millions of years to remember how to be green again. Time passes differently when you're stranded in deep time. You've been walking through this Triassic wasteland for what feels like hours, though the sun hasn't moved perceptibly in the sky. Everything here exists in a kind of geological present tense, where moments stretch like molten glass and change happens so slowly it might as well be stillness. Your feet have learned the rhythm of walking on sand that shifts and slides with each step. The fine grains work their way into your shoes, between your toes, creating a constant awareness of this alien ground beneath you. Each dune you climb reveals only more dunes beyond, rolling away toward horizons that waver like water in the impossible heat. But as you walk, you begin to notice things that weren't apparent at first. Subtle signs that this isn't just empty desert, but the patient aftermath of catastrophe slowly teaching itself to hope again. The sand beneath your feet isn't uniform. Here and there, you find patches where it's stained darker, richer, mixed with what might once have been soil before the great dying stripped away everything that made it alive. These patches hold moisture differently, creating tiny variations in temperature that you can feel through the soles of your shoes. Cool spots in an otherwise burning world. In some of these darker patches, if you look closely, you can see tiny crystals forming, where minerals in the sand have begun their patient work of chemical transformation. Salt flowers, delicate and temporary, blooming from the interaction of groundwater and surface heat. They last only minutes in this harsh sun before dissolving again, but their brief existence speaks of processes beginning, of chemistry learning new ways to organize itself. The wind that carries sand also carries something else, the faintest hint of water vapor, so thin you might convince yourself you're imagining it. But your body, desperate for any sign of humidity in this desiccated air, responds to even these microscopic traces. Somewhere, perhaps hundreds of miles away, there might be pools of water slowly evaporating under the relentless sun, sending their molecular ghosts across this emptiness. You pause at the crest of a particularly tall dune and look back at your tracks. They're already being erased by the wind, filled in grain by grain until no sign of your passage remains. This is how time works, in deep time. Everything temporary, everything constantly written and rewritten by forces larger than any individual story. But looking at those disappearing footprints, you realize something that makes you catch your breath despite the difficult air. You are the first human being to ever stand in this place, in this moment. Your species won't exist for another 250 million years. The mammals that will eventually give rise to human beings haven't even evolved yet. You are impossibly alone, not just in space, but in time itself. The only conscious observer in a world that has temporarily forgotten consciousness. The weight of this solitude is both crushing and strangely liberating. No one will ever know you are here. No photograph will capture this moment. No story will record your passage through this desolation. You exist here in perfect anonymity, a secret shared only between yourself and deep time. As the sun reaches its highest point, though in this heat, it's impossible to tell if it's actually noon or if the sun simply never moves from its position of maximum cruelty. You notice something that makes you stop walking altogether. The sand around you is breathing. Not literally, of course, but there's a rhythm to how it moves in the wind, a pattern that suggests something more organized than simple erosion. The dunes rise and fall with what looks almost like respiration, expanding and contracting as temperature differences create subtle air currents that you can feel but not quite see. You kneel down and place your palm flat against the sand. Through the scorching heat, you can feel it, a pulse, almost like a heartbeat, but slower, deeper, working on a time scale that makes your own heartbeat seem frantic and temporary. It's the planet itself, breathing, you realize, adjusting to this new configuration of atmosphere and temperature, learning how to be stable in the aftermath of chaos. This breathing sand is one of Earth's first attempts at healing. The wind patterns that shape these dunes will eventually help distribute what little moisture exists across wider areas. The chemical reactions happening in the deeper layers will slowly begin to neutralize some of the acids that make the air so difficult to breathe. Even the heat itself, extreme as it is beginning the long work of driving the processes that will eventually restore balance. You close your eyes and try to synchronize your own breathing with this geological respiration. Breathe in with the expanding dunes. Breathe out as they settle and compact. It's meditation on a planetary scale, a way of existing in harmony with processes so vast they dwarf all human concerns. In this rhythm, you find a kind of peace that surprises you. Yes, you're stranded in one of the most hostile periods in Earth's history. Yes, the air is poison and the heat is unbearable, and the landscape is utterly empty of anything that resembles the life you know. But you're also witnessing something incredible, the patient resilience of a planet that refuses to stay broken. Every grain of sand that moves in the wind is part of this healing. Every temperature gradient that creates a tiny breeze is an experiment in stability. Every chemical reaction happening beneath your feet is a small step toward the eventual restoration of conditions that can support life again. The sun beats down, relentless and unforgiving, but even its cruelty serves a purpose in this process. The extreme heat is driving chemical reactions that will eventually remove excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The lack of vegetation means that weathering processes are working directly on exposed rock, slowly consuming the greenhouse gases that make this world so hostile. Behind you, almost imperceptible at first, you hear the sound you've been waiting for, the soft hum of your time machine beginning to stir again. Its quantum fields are rebuilding themselves, drawing energy from processes you don't understand, preparing to tear you away from this moment and cast you into another impossible time. You take one last look around this breathing desert, this world in the process of teaching itself to live again. In a strange way, you'll miss it, miss its honesty, its refusal to pretend that survival is easy, its demonstration that even the most complete endings can become beginnings. The humming grows stronger, and you feel the familiar tingle that means the temporal fields are beginning to form around you. The air shimmers, not with heat this time, but with the distortion of space-time bending to accommodate your passage. As the early Triassic begins to fade around you, dissolving into streams of probability and quantum uncertainty, you carry with you the rhythm of the breathing sand, the knowledge that patience and persistence can outlast any catastrophe, and the strange comfort of having witnessed a world in the process of healing itself, one grain at a time. The machine pulls you forward through time, its broken navigation systems choosing your destination according to laws of chaos and malfunction that make no sense to conscious minds. You don't know where or when you're going next, but you've learned something important in this desert of deep time. No matter how alien the world becomes, no matter how hostile or strange, there is always something there worth seeing, worth understanding, worth carrying with you into whatever impossible moment comes next. The transition hits you like diving into water. One moment you're surrounded by the clean, harsh simplicity of desert air, and the next you're drowning in atmosphere so rich and thick it makes your head spin. Your lungs, still adapted to the thin, poison air of the Triassic, suddenly find themselves flooded with oxygen at concentrations that shouldn't exist. 35%, maybe more, compared to the 21% your body knows how to process. The effect is immediate and overwhelming. Your heart races, not from fear or exertion this time, but from pure chemical overstimulation. Colors become impossibly vivid, edges sharper than they should be, and every sound carries with it harmonics you've never heard before. You feel simultaneously energized and dizzy, as if someone has turned up the intensity of existence itself. You've landed in the late Carboniferous, though again, you don't know this yet. All you know is that you've gone from hell to something that might be paradise, if paradise were designed by something with no understanding of human scale or human needs. The first thing you see, once your oxygen-drunk vision clears, is green. Not the familiar green of grass and trees from your own time, but something deeper, more primal, green that seems to pulse with its own internal light. You're standing in a forest, but calling it a forest feels inadequate. This is more like standing inside a living cathedral built from plants that have learned to dream. The trees around you stretch impossibly high, their trunks thick and ridged like the skin of sleeping giants. These are scaled trees, lepidodendron, though you don't know their names. They rise 100 feet above you, their bark covered in diamond-shaped patterns that catch and scatter the filtered sunlight in ways that make the entire forest seem to sparkle and breathe. But it's not just the size of these trees that makes them alien. It's their structure. They don't branch the way you expect trees to branch. Instead, they fork again and again in perfect Y-shapes, creating a canopy that looks more like the neural networks of some vast, distributed brain than anything you recognize as forest architecture. Beneath the canopy, the forest floor is a maze of fallen logs and standing water, streams and pools that reflect the green light filtering down from above. The air is so humid you can see it, moisture hanging in visible curtains that part around you as you walk. Every breath feels like drinking, thick and rich and almost too substantial for your lungs to process. And in this green twilight, things are moving. The first creature you see stops you dead in your tracks. It's flying, or rather, hovering, just at eye level. And for a moment, your brain refuses to process what you're looking at. It has the basic structure of a dragonfly, but scaled up to impossible proportions. Its wingspan stretches nearly a meter from tip to tip, and when it turns towards you, you can see compound eyes the size of golf balls, reflecting your own amazed face in thousands of tiny fragments. This is Meganeura, the griffin fly, though in this moment it's simply the largest insect you've ever imagined, floating motionless in the thick air with the kind of perfect hovering control that seems to defy physics. Its wings catch the light like stained glass, and when it moves, it does so with a sound like rustling paper amplified to impossible volume. You stand perfectly still, not wanting to startle this magnificent creature, but also uncertain whether it might consider you prey. In the oxygen-rich air of the Carboniferous, insects have grown to sizes that blur the line between arthropod and dragon, and their behavior follows rules that won't be written for millions of years. The griffin fly regards you with what might be curiosity, its massive head tilting from side to side as if trying to understand what you are. You're unlike anything in its evolutionary experience, a mammalian body plan that won't appear for eons, covered in synthetic fabrics that have never existed in any natural process it might recognize. To this ancient predator, you are as alien as it is to you. After what feels like hours, but is probably only seconds, the griffin fly makes its decision. With a sound like a helicopter rotor made of silk, it banks away from you and disappears into the green shadows between the scaled trees, leaving you alone with your racing heart and hyperoxygenated bloodstream. But you're not alone for long. The Carboniferous forest is alive with creatures that exist on scales your world has forgotten. As you pick your way carefully between the pools and fallen logs, trying to find stable footing on ground that seems to shift and breathe beneath your feet, you become aware of movement everywhere around you. Something catches your eye at the base of one of the scale trees, movement that's too regular, too purposeful to be wind or water. You approach slowly, and what you see makes you take several steps backward so quickly you nearly lose your balance on the slippery ground. It's a millipede, but the word millipede fails completely to capture the reality of what you're looking at. This creature is nearly 8 feet long and as thick around as your torso, its segmented body moving with the kind of deliberate, unstoppable momentum you associate with trains rather than insects. Each of its hundreds of legs moves in perfect coordination, creating a rippling wave of motion that propels its massive bulk through the undergrowth with surprising grace. This is Arthropleura, the largest land arthropod that will ever exist, though in this moment it's simply an impossible dream of evolutionary excess made manifest. Its chitin shell gleams in the filtered forest light, sections sliding over each other with the sound of armor plates shifting. When it pauses to investigate something on the forest floor, perhaps a fallen piece of fruit from the strange, ancient trees, you can see the intricate patterns etched into its carapace, mathematical spirals and geometric designs that seem almost deliberately artistic. The creature shows no interest in you, but its very presence changes how you move through this forest. Every step must be considered, every path weighed against the possibility of encountering something even larger, even more outside the bounds of what you thought possible for terrestrial life. The oxygen that makes these giants possible also affects you in ways both subtle and profound. Your reflexes are faster, your perception sharper, but also unstable, prone to moments of confusion and disorientation as your nervous system struggles to process sensory input at these enhanced levels. Colors shift and breathe at the edges of your vision. Sounds carry impossible distances and seem to come from directions that don't quite make sense. And then you smell smoke. It's faint at first, just a hint of something burning carried on the humid air. But as you continue deeper into the forest, the smell grows stronger. This isn't the friendly smoke of a campfire, or even the concerning smoke of a forest fire in your own time. This is something different, sharper, more chemical, with undertones that make your enhanced senses recoil. You push through a curtain of hanging moss and emerge into a clearing where you can see the source. In the distance, perhaps a mile away, a wall of orange light flickers against the base of the forest canopy. Fire, but fire unlike anything you've ever seen, burning with an intensity that turns the very air visible. This is what happens when forests evolved for normal oxygen levels encounter atmosphere with 35% O2. The slightest spark, lightning perhaps, or the friction of falling branches, becomes an inferno that burns with the intensity of pure oxygen. These fires burn so hot, they create their own weather systems, generating winds that can spread the flames faster than any living thing can run. You watch the distant fire with a mixture of fascination and growing alarm. Even from this distance, you can feel its heat on your face, can see how it turns the forest canopy into something that resembles the surface of the sun more than anything terrestrial. The oxygen-rich air doesn't just feed these fires, it makes them into elemental forces that reshape entire continents. But even as you watch this demonstration of destruction, you notice something remarkable. The forest around you isn't fleeing from the fire, it's preparing for it. The scale trees have thick, fire-resistant bark. Many of the plants growing near the forest floor have structures that look designed to survive intense heat. Some even seem to have seed pods that might only open under extreme temperatures. This forest has evolved with these oxygen fires. They're not disasters. They're part of the ecosystem's life cycle, massive recycling events that clear away accumulated organic matter and create space for new growth. What looks like catastrophe from your perspective is actually just another day in the Carboniferous, another turn in the great wheel of carbon and oxygen and life finding ways to persist through conditions that seem impossible. Behind you, barely audible over the sounds of the burning forest and the movement of giant insects, your time machine begins its familiar stirring. The quantum fields are rebuilding once again, preparing to tear you away from this oxygen-drunk paradise of giants and fire. But before you go, you take one last look around this impossible garden. Despite the alien scale of everything, despite the fires and the giant predators and the air that makes your head spin, there's something undeniably beautiful about this place. It's life unleashed, evolution given unlimited resources, and told to dream as big as chemistry will allow. The massive millipede you encountered earlier emerges from the undergrowth again, moving with that same patient, unstoppable determination. For a moment, you and this ancient giant regard each other across the vast gulf of deep time. Neither of you quite understands what the other is, but there's something in that moment of mutual recognition. Two forms of consciousness, separated by millions of years of evolution, sharing the same strange world for just an instant. The time machine's call becomes impossible to ignore. Space-time begins to shimmer around you, the forest of giants starting to dissolve into probability streams and quantum uncertainty. As the late Carboniferous fades away, you carry with you the memory of air so rich it made your thoughts sparkle, of creatures so large they redefined what it means to be alive on land, and of fires so intense they wrote themselves into the very DNA of forests. Your broken machine pulls you onward through deep time, its navigation systems still following the logic of malfunction and chaos. You don't know what impossible world awaits you next, but you've learned something important in this oxygen garden. Abundance and danger are often the same thing, and what looks like paradise from one perspective might be completely uninhabitable from another. The green light of the Carboniferous forest dissolves into the streaming colors of temporal transition, carrying you toward another broken moment in Earth's long, strange story. Silence. Pure, absolute silence in a way that makes your ears ring with phantom sounds. After the rich cacophony of the Carboniferous forest, the rustling of giant wings, the scraping of impossible arthropods, the distant roar of oxygen fires, this new world greets you with a quietude so complete it feels like a physical presence. You've arrived in the early Devonian, though once again, the broken chronometer of your machine gives you no clue about when you are. All you know is that you've been deposited in a landscape that looks like the set of a science fiction film about visiting alien worlds, except that this alien world is your own Earth, just wearing a face from so deep in the past that nothing about it seems familiar. The first thing you notice after the profound silence is the color of the light. The sun above you burns with a harsh, white intensity that seems to bleach the color out of everything it touches. This isn't the warm, golden sunlight filtered through the green canopy of the Carboniferous, or even the brutal but familiar heat of the Triassic desert. This is light, unfiltered by any of the atmospheric chemistry your eyes evolved to interpret, and it makes everything look simultaneously overexposed and unnaturally sharp. The landscape stretches before you like the surface of an abandoned planet. Rocky terrain, mostly barren, punctuated by formations that your brain struggles to categorize. They're too tall and straight to be rocks, too organic-looking to be geological formations, too alien to be anything you recognize as life. But they are alive, these towering structures, and as your eyes adjust to the strange light, you begin to understand that you're standing in the midst of the largest living things Earth has ever produced. The nearest structure rises about 20 feet away, and as you approach it cautiously, its true scale becomes apparent. It's massive, easily 25 feet tall and several feet across at its base, tapering as it rises into the harsh white sky. The surface is rough and textured, covered in what look like scales or plates, but arranged in patterns too regular to be random, too organic to be artificial. This is Proto-Taxites, though you don't know the name. Scientists in your time will puzzle over these structures for decades, unable to decide whether they're plants or fungi or something else entirely. Standing here in the early Devonian, you're witnessing one of evolution's strangest experiments, organisms that grew to the size of trees millions of years before trees existed, creating forests of fungal towers in a world that had barely learned to support life on land. You reach out carefully to touch the surface of the nearest tower. The texture is unlike anything you've ever felt. Not quite bark, not quite skin, but something in between. It's dry, but not brittle, firm but yielding slightly under pressure. When you press your ear against it, you can hear something that might be the circulation of fluids through internal channels, or might just be the wind moving through hollow spaces you can't see. Moving between these fungal giants, you begin to appreciate the profound strangeness of this world. There are no animals here, at least none that you can see or hear. The silence isn't just the absence of familiar sounds. It's the absence of the entire concept of animal noise. No birds, because birds won't exist for hundreds of millions of years. No mammals, no reptiles, no amphibians calling from hidden pools. Even insects are rare and primitive, nothing like the giants you encountered in the Carboniferous. This is a world where the primary form of complex life is fungal, and it operates according to principles that seem almost supernatural compared to the biology you understand. These towers around you are just the visible portions of organisms that extend far underground. Vast mycorrhizal networks that might connect every structure you can see into a single, continent-spanning entity. The ground beneath your feet reflects this fungal dominance. Instead of soil in any sense you'd recognize, there's a complex mat of fungal threads and spores, creating a surface that feels slightly spongy, slightly alive. Each step releases tiny puffs of spores into the air, not enough to see clearly in the harsh light, but enough to make the air itself feel thick and organic. As you walk deeper into this forest of towers, you notice that the silence isn't quite as complete as you first thought. There are sounds here, but they operate on frequencies and timescales that don't correspond to anything in your experience. A deep, almost subsonic humming that might be the sound of spores being released into the air. Occasional soft pops and clicks that could be the expansion and contraction of internal structures responding to temperature changes. And beneath it all, so low, you feel it more than hear it, something that might be communication. These fungal giants might be talking to each other through chemical signals you cannot detect, electrical impulses passing through the network of threads beneath your feet, information flowing at the speed of chemical diffusion rather than nervous system transmission. You pause in the shadow of one of the largest towers and try to imagine what it would be like to be conscious at this scale, with this kind of distributed awareness. Your thoughts happen in milliseconds, shaped by electrical impulses racing through neural networks. But what if consciousness could operate over hours, days, years? What if awareness could be distributed across miles of underground networks, processing information from thousands of different sensory inputs over timescales that make human thoughts seem like brief flickers? Looking up at the tower above you, you wonder if it's aware of your presence. Your footsteps on the fungal mat might have sent chemical signals racing through the underground network. Your breath, your body heat, the electromagnetic field generated by your nervous system, all of these might be data points in some vast, slow-thinking consciousness that operates on principles you can't even begin to understand. The thought is both humbling and terrifying. You might be standing in the midst of the largest, oldest intelligence Earth has ever produced, and you would never know it because its thoughts move too slowly for you to recognize them as thoughts at all. The white sun beats down mercilessly, and you notice that the fungal towers seem to shimmer slightly in the heat. Their surfaces are covered with structures too small to see clearly, but which seem to be constantly moving, adjusting, responding to changes in light and temperature and humidity. These organisms have mastered the art of surviving in conditions that would kill most forms of life you're familiar with, turning the harsh radiation and extreme temperatures into resources rather than obstacles. You begin to notice other forms of life scattered between the fungal giants, primitive plants, low-growing and strange, that look more like algae that have learned to survive on land than anything you'd recognize as vegetation. They cluster around the bases of the towers, perhaps benefiting from nutrients released by the fungal networks, creating tiny oases of green in the otherwise monochrome landscape. Some of these early plants have structures that might be primitive leaves. Others look more like collections of branching stems with no clear organization. Their evolution's first tentative experiments with photosynthesis on land, and they give the landscape a patchy, experimental quality, as if life itself is still learning the rules of terrestrial existence. The air around these plant clusters smells different, not quite the rich, organic scent of forests you know, but something thinner, more chemical. It's the smell of oxygen being produced by photosynthesis, but oxygen mixed with compounds that won't exist in your time, byproducts of metabolic processes that evolution will eventually abandon as inefficient. You climb to the top of a small rocky outcrop to get a better view of this strange landscape, and what you see takes your breath away. The fungal towers extend to the horizon in every direction, creating a forest of organic skyscrapers that dwarfs anything from your own time. Some rise nearly 40 feet into the harsh white sky, their surfaces catching and scattering the unfiltered sunlight in ways that make them seem to glow from within. From this elevated perspective, you can see the patterns in their arrangement, not random as you first thought, but organized according to some principle you can't quite grasp. They cluster and separate in ways that suggest purpose, communication, perhaps even something like urban planning operating on geological timescales. Between the towers, you can now see what might be roads or channels, pathways through the fungal mat that connect different clusters of giants. These pathways pulse occasionally with changes in color and texture, as if information or nutrients are flowing through them like blood through arteries. The silence of this world begins to feel less empty and more pregnant with meanings you can't decode. Every surface seems to be listening, processing, responding to stimuli you can't detect. The very air thrums with spores and chemical signals, creating a communication network that spans continents and operates in dimensions of time and chemistry that make human language seem crude and hasty. You notice that your breathing has changed since arriving here. The air is thinner than in the Carboniferous, with only about 15% oxygen, less than your own time. But it's not just the reduced oxygen that makes each breath feel different. There's something else in this atmosphere, microscopic particles that coat your throat and lungs with each inhalation. Spores, probably, though whether they're harmful or beneficial or simply neutral, you have no way of knowing. The thought that you might be breathing in the reproductive cells of organisms larger than buildings is both fascinating and disturbing. Every breath connects you more intimately to this alien ecosystem, making you part of its slow, vast metabolism, whether you want to be or not. As you prepare to climb down from your rocky perch, movement catches your eye. At first, you think it might be wind moving through the strange vegetation, but the motion is too purposeful, too directed. Something is walking between the towers, something roughly your size, but moving with a gait that looks nothing like human locomotion. You freeze, trying to make out details in the harsh light and complex shadows cast by the fungal giants. The creature, if it is a creature, moves with a curious bobbing motion, stopping frequently as if investigating things on the ground. When it passes into a patch of clearer light, you catch a glimpse of segmented legs, multiple pairs of them, and a body that seems to be mostly head and thorax. This might be one of the first arthropods to successfully colonize land, a pioneer species testing the boundaries of what's possible for animal life in this harsh, alien environment. It shows no awareness of your presence, focused entirely on whatever investigation or foraging behavior has brought it into this forest of giants. Watching this small explorer navigate between structures that dwarf it by orders of magnitude, you feel a sudden kinship with it. You're both visitors here, both trying to understand and survive in a world that operates according to rules neither of you fully comprehend. The difference is that this arthropod belongs to this time, is part of the slow dance of evolution that will eventually lead to forests and animals and all the complexity you know. You're just a tourist, a temporal accident, observing from outside the flow of natural time. The sound of your time machine rebuilding itself grows more insistent, and you reluctantly climb down from your observation point. As you make your way back through the forest of towers, you try to memorize everything you can about this place: the texture of the fungal surfaces, the quality of the light, the profound silence, broken only by the whisper of wind and the distant communication of organisms too large and slow for you to understand. You pause beside one of the smaller towers and place both hands against its surface, closing your eyes and trying to feel whatever slow pulse might be moving through its interior. For just a moment, you think you detect something, a rhythm so deep and slow it might be the heartbeat of continents, the breathing of ecosystems, the patient thoughts of an intelligence distributed across geological scales. The temporal fields begin to form around you, and the early Devonian starts to dissolve into quantum uncertainty. As this world of fungal giants fades away, you carry with you the memory of silence, so complete it felt like a presence, of life experimenting with scales and timescales that dwarf all human experience, and of intelligence that might exist in forms so alien you couldn't recognize it even when standing in its midst. Your broken machine pulls you forward through deep time once again, its navigation systems still following the chaotic logic of malfunction. The streaming colors of temporal transition surround you as you leave behind the world of spore gardens and enter the flowing uncertainty between moments, between worlds, between different experiments in what it means to be alive on Earth. Between worlds, between moments, your broken time machine dreams. In the space that isn't quite space, in the time that flows sideways through dimensions, your mind can't properly process. You find yourself suspended in the machine's fever dream attempts to repair itself. The quantum fields that should carry you smoothly from one temporal coordinate to another have become tangled, confused, creating eddies and whirlpools in the stream of causality. You float in a bubble of distorted space-time, watching fragments of different eras bleed through the damaged walls of your temporal vehicle. For a moment you see the green flash of carboniferous forests overlaid with the white light of Devonian fungal towers. The heat of the Triassic desert mingles with the oxygen-drunk atmosphere of ancient swamps, creating impossible combinations of sensation that make your head spin. This is what malfunction looks like when the technology involved operates on principles beyond human comprehension. Your machine doesn't just break in mechanical ways, it breaks across dimensions of reality that don't have names in any human language. Time becomes spatial, space becomes temporal. Cause and effect start operating in directions that violate everything you thought you knew about how the universe works. Through the translucent walls of your temporal bubble, you catch glimpses of moments that might be real or might be hallucinations generated by quantum fields in distress. A forest where the trees are made of crystallized time, their branches reaching not upward, but backward and forward through centuries. An ocean where each wave carries a different epoch, Cambrian trilobites riding tsunamis that crash into beaches made of future diamonds. Your own body feels strange in this in-between space, as if the normal rules of biology are suggestions rather than laws. Your heartbeat echoes strangely, each pulse seeming to ripple outward through dimensions you can't see. Your thoughts move like honey, slow and thick, while your perceptions race at light speed through probability cascades that show you every possible destination your broken machine might choose. The machine's attempts at self-repair create bursts of temporal static, moments when past and future collapse into impossible combinations. You see, remember, will experience standing in a desert of glass that might be the Triassic heated beyond endurance, or might be the far future when the sun has expanded and Earth has become Venus. You will feel the touch of creatures that exist in the spaces between seconds, beings made of pure duration that feed on temporal paradoxes. But slowly, gradually, like a symphony emerging from chaos, the machine's systems begin to find harmony again. The overlapping timescapes separate back into distinct possibilities. The fever dream visions fade, replaced by the familiar streaming colors of normal temporal travel. Your broken navigation system, following its own inscrutable logic, has chosen your next destination. As the quantum fields stabilize around you, you catch one last glimpse of something in the temporal static, a flash of your own world, green and familiar and impossibly distant. For just an instant, you see trees you recognize, hear birds singing songs that make sense to your evolved hearing, smell air that your lungs know how to process without effort. Then it's gone, that vision of home, and you're falling toward another impossibility, another experiment in Earth's long journey toward becoming the world you know. You land hard, not the gentle materialization you've grown accustomed to, but an actual physical impact that sends you stumbling forward onto hands and knees. The temporal bubble dissolves around you with a sound like tearing silk, and immediately you're struck by sensations so overwhelming they make you gasp. Gravity. Not the familiar 1G pull, but something heavier, more insistent, as if the planet itself has gained mass while you weren't looking. Every movement requires effort. Every breath feels like lifting weights. Your body, evolved for different conditions, struggles to adapt to this new reality, where simply standing upright becomes an act of defiance against physics. The air around you thrums with subsonic vibrations that you feel in your bones before you hear them with your ears. Deep, groaning sounds, like the timbers of an enormous ship, flexing in heavy seas, but coming from every direction at once. The very ground beneath you seems to pulse with these rhythms, as if you've landed on the surface of some vast, sleeping creature. You struggle to your feet, fighting against the increased gravity, and take your first real look at this new world. What you see defies comprehension on such a fundamental level that your brain simply refuses to process it for several long seconds. You're standing at the edge of a forest, but forest is completely inadequate to describe what stretches before you. These aren't trees in any sense you understand. They're living mountains, organic skyscrapers that rise so high into the sky that their tops disappear into clouds you didn't even notice forming. The nearest trunk is easily 1,000 feet in diameter, its bark ridged and grooved like the hide of some primordial giant, disappearing upward into a canopy so far above you that it might as well be in another country. This is what Earth looked like when it decided that life should be measured not in inches or feet, but in miles. You've landed in an era when the planet was experimenting with scale in ways that make the giants of the Carboniferous look like houseplants. These trees, if they are trees, are so large they create their own weather systems, their own gravity wells, their own geological processes. As your eyes adjust to the scale of what you're seeing, you begin to notice movement in the vast spaces between these living monuments. Something is walking among them, and when you catch your first clear glimpse of it, you understand why the gravity feels so heavy, why every sound carries harmonics that seem to come from the earth itself. The creature moving between the giant trees is itself giant, but giant in a way that makes you question what you thought you knew about the limits of biological possibility. It moves on 4 legs, each one thick as the trunk of the largest tree you've ever seen in your own time. Its neck stretches upward like a living construction crane, allowing its head to browse among branches that are themselves hundreds of feet above the ground. This is a sauropod, though the word seems pathetically inadequate. This is what happens when evolution decides that the only limit on size is the structural integrity of bone and the efficiency of cardiovascular systems. Every step this creature takes sends vibrations through the ground that you can feel through the soles of your feet. Every breath it takes moves enough air to create breezes that rustle vegetation acres away. But it's not just the size that overwhelms you, it's the grace. Despite its impossible dimensions, the creature moves with a fluid elegance that speaks of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Each step is placed with careful precision. Each turn of its massive head follows graceful curves that minimize the energy required to move such enormous mass. You watch, transfixed, as the giant approaches one of the equally giant trees and begins to feed. The sound of its browsing is like distant thunder, tons of vegetation being processed by teeth the size of dinner plates, jaws powerful enough to snap tree trunks that would dwarf anything in your own era. From your perspective at ground level, the interaction between the giant herbivore and the giant trees seems almost astronomical in scale. You're watching planets feeding on other planets, geological processes disguised as biology. The amount of plant matter this creature consumes in a single bite would feed a modern forest for years, and yet there's something almost intimate about the scene. The way the sauropod's movements complement the swaying of the enormous tree branches suggests a relationship refined over eons, predator and prey that have learned to exist in careful balance despite their overwhelming scales. You begin to walk, or rather, struggle, through this landscape of giants, your muscles burning with the effort of moving against the increased gravitational field. The forest floor is a maze of fallen branches that are themselves the size of normal trees, creating a complex terrain of natural bridges and caverns that you can explore like a three-dimensional maze. The light filtering down through the canopy creates a cathedral atmosphere, with shafts of sunlight penetrating the green darkness at angles that seem almost intentionally dramatic. But the scale of this cathedral is beyond human comprehension. The ceiling is miles above you, supported by columns that are themselves living ecosystems, supporting thousands of species you can't even see from ground level. As you navigate this maze of fallen titans, you begin to encounter other forms of life adapted to this world of giants. Insects the size of birds flutter between the massive tree trunks, their wings creating sounds like distant applause. Amphibians the size of cars lurk in pools of water collected in the hollows between enormous roots. But most disturbing are the predators. You hear it before you see it, a sound like sword blades being sharpened on stone, but amplified to impossible volume. Following the sound, moving with a stealth that seems impossible for something so large, is a creature that redefines your understanding of what it means to be a predator. The theropod is smaller than the sauropod you observed earlier, but only in the way that a locomotive is smaller than a skyscraper. It moves on two legs, each one ending in claws that could serve as grappling hooks for construction equipment. Its head, held high on a muscular neck, turns constantly as it hunts, processing sensory information through systems refined for detecting prey that operates on scales measured in tons rather than pounds. You freeze, hoping that your smaller size and alien scent might make you invisible to a predator adapted for hunting giants. The theropod pauses, its head tilting as it processes some sensory input you can't detect. For a terrifying moment, you think it might have noticed you, but then it continues its hunt, following trails of scent and sound that lead toward prey you can't imagine. Watching this apex predator move through the forest of giants, you begin to understand something profound about scale and ecology. In your own time, predators and prey exist in careful balance, with energy flowing efficiently through food webs where each level is constrained by the availability of resources below it. But here, in this world of giants, those constraints have been temporarily lifted, allowing life to experiment with sizes that border on the geological. The sound comes from somewhere far away, rolling through the forest like slow thunder. It's answered by another roar from a different direction, then another, until the air itself seems to vibrate with the communication of creatures operating on scales that make human voices seem like the chirping of insects. These giants are talking to each other across distances measured in miles, coordinating behaviors that might involve entire ecosystems moving in patterns too large and slow for smaller creatures to comprehend. You're witnessing social behavior on a planetary scale, communication networks that span continents and operate on timescales that make human conversations seem frantic and temporary. Your time machine stirs again, its quantum fields beginning their familiar reconstruction process. But this time, the process seems more labored, as if the machine itself is struggling against the increased gravity and the electromagnetic fields generated by creatures so large they affect local space-time. As you prepare for another temporal transition, you take one last look at this impossible world of giants. Despite the overwhelming scale, despite the alien nature of everything you've witnessed, there's something undeniably majestic about it. This is life unleashed from the normal constraints of physics and chemistry, allowed to grow until it becomes indistinguishable from geography itself. The sauropod you observed earlier has moved on, but in the distance, you can see others, a herd of living mountains migrating slowly across a landscape that seems designed to accommodate their impossible dimensions. They move like slow-motion earthquakes, reshaping the very topology of the forest as they pass. As the familiar shimmer of temporal displacement begins to surround you, you realize that this world of giants has taught you something important about the relationship between time and scale. In your own era, life operates on scales that allow for quick adaptation, rapid change, evolutionary flexibility. But here, life has chosen a different strategy: persistence through sheer mass, survival through becoming too large to be easily destroyed. These giants will dominate their world for millions of years, their very size making them nearly immune to all but the most catastrophic changes. But that same size will also make them vulnerable when conditions change too quickly for creatures measured in tons to adapt. The temporal fields reach critical coherence, and the world of giants begins to dissolve around you. As it fades, you carry with you the memory of what it feels like to be truly small, to exist as a mote of consciousness in a world where life has learned to think big on scales that dwarf all human ambition. Your broken machine pulls you onward through time, carrying you toward another impossible moment in Earth's long experiment with existence. You emerge from temporal transition into an environment so alien that your brain struggles to process what your senses are telling you. You're underwater, but breathing normally. The water around you glows with its own soft, phosphorescent light, and it moves not with the familiar rhythms of waves and currents, but with something that looks disturbingly like respiration. This is the Archean Ocean, though your broken chronometer offers no hint of when you've arrived. All you know is that you're floating in Earth's first attempt at creating a global circulatory system in waters that are less like the oceans you know and more like the bloodstream of a planet-sized organism learning how to live. The water itself is wrong in ways that make your skin crawl, even as it supports you with impossible gentleness. It's thick, almost viscous, tinted with colors that don't exist in any modern ocean. Deep purples and greens that shift and swirl as if the water itself is alive and thinking. The chemistry here is so alien that the normal laws of buoyancy and pressure seem like suggestions rather than requirements. You're surrounded by the slow, patient work of the first chemosynthetic bacteria, organisms so primitive they make the complex ecosystems you've witnessed in other eras look like advanced civilizations. These are the original pioneers, the first experiments in the conversion of chemical energy into biological organization, and they're turning the ocean into a vast, slow-burning chemical laboratory. Columns of different-colored water rise and fall around you like the organs of some impossible creature, each column representing a different chemical process, a different experiment in the basic machinery of life. Hot water, rich with minerals leached from volcanic vents on the ocean floor, mixes with cooler surface water in patterns that create their own weather systems, their own seasonal cycles. The strangest thing about this ancient ocean is how it seems to be aware of your presence. Not conscious in any way you'd recognize, but responsive, adaptive, as if the entire body of water is a single organism learning to regulate its own chemistry. Currents shift subtly to accommodate your movement. Temperature gradients adjust to maintain your comfort. The very composition of the water around you seems to be modifying itself to make your presence possible. You realize that you're not just floating in Earth's first ocean, you're floating inside Earth's first attempt at creating something like a nervous system, a planet-wide network of chemical communication that allows different parts of this vast organism to coordinate their activities. Deep below you, beyond the reach of any light you can see, volcanic vents are pumping heat and chemicals into this liquid medium, creating the energy gradients that drive all the chemical processes around you. But these aren't the simple hydrothermal vents of modern oceans. These are the primary organs of a planetary metabolism, the furnaces where Earth is learning to convert geological energy into biological organization. The pulses you hear are the rhythm of this planetary heart, the cyclic process by which heat and chemicals are distributed through the global ocean system. Each pulse sends waves of warmth and chemical activity through the water, and you can feel these waves passing through your body, making you temporarily part of Earth's earliest metabolism. Around you, in the phosphorescent glow of the water, you begin to see shapes that might be the first tentative experiments in multicellular organization. Not quite organisms in any sense you'd recognize, but aggregations of cells that have learned to work together, to share resources and coordinate their activities in ways that hint at the possibility of true complexity. These proto-organisms drift through the water like living galaxies, their internal structures visible through translucent membranes that pulse with their own slow rhythms. They're beautiful in an abstract way, geometric forms that suggest crystal structures as much as biological organization, symmetries that follow mathematical principles rather than evolutionary pressures. The ocean current that carries you is not random. You gradually realize that you're being transported according to some pattern, some purpose that operates on scales too large for you to comprehend from your perspective as a single floating consciousness. The water is carrying you through different chemical zones, different experimental environments where early life is testing different approaches to existence. In one zone, the water tastes of metal and sulfur, and the primitive organisms here glow with harsh chemical light as they process these raw materials into more complex compounds. In another zone, the water is sweet and clear, populated by organisms so delicate they look like living jewels, creatures that have learned to extract energy from the interaction of light and chemistry. You pass through forests of what might be the first photosynthetic organisms, structures that aren't quite plants, but aren't quite bacteria either. They stretch toward the surface like living towers, their surfaces covered with structures that might be primitive leaves or might be sensory organs designed to detect the faintest traces of sunlight penetrating the thick alien atmosphere above. These protoplants are beginning the long work of transforming Earth's atmosphere, but they're doing it slowly, carefully, as if they understand that too rapid a change might destabilize the delicate chemical balances that make their existence possible. Each one processes tiny amounts of carbon dioxide and releases tiny amounts of oxygen. But across the vast scales of this ocean, these tiny contributions are beginning to add up to planetary transformation. As you float through this living ocean, you begin to understand that you're witnessing the birth of the oxygen cycle, the slow process by which Earth's atmosphere will be transformed from a mixture of methane and ammonia into something that can support complex life. But this transformation is happening on timescales that make geological change seem rapid. Chemical evolution proceeding with the patience of cosmic processes. The water around you shimmers with what might be the first attempts at sexual reproduction, cellular exchange processes that allow genetic information to be shared and combined in new ways. You watch microscopic drama unfold as primitive organisms experiment with cooperation and competition, with the basic strategies that will eventually lead to the evolution of complexity. Your time machine stirs in the depths of this ancient ocean, its quantum fields interacting strangely with the dense, chemically active water around you. The temporal displacement process seems different here, more gradual, as if the machine is having to work against the planetary metabolism that surrounds it. But slowly, the familiar shimmer of temporal fields begins to form around you. As you prepare to leave this breathing ocean, you take one last look at the first experiment in planetary life, the original attempt by chemistry to organize itself into something resembling consciousness. The Archean Ocean begins to dissolve around you, its phosphorescent glow fading into the streaming colors of temporal transition. As this world of breathing water disappears, you carry with you the memory of being part of something larger than yourself, of floating in the bloodstream of a planet learning to live, and of witnessing the first tentative steps toward the complexity that will eventually make consciousness possible. Your broken machine carries you onward through deep time, leaving behind the world of living oceans and pulling you toward another impossible cold. Not the sharp, biting cold of winter in your own time, but something deeper, more fundamental, cold that reaches into the very structure of atoms and slows their dance to a near stop. Cold that transforms the familiar physics of liquid and gas into a crystalline geometry where every breath creates sculptures of frozen air. You've landed in Snowball Earth, though your broken chronometer provides no clue about this latest temporal destination. All you know is that you've arrived in a world where winter has learned to be patient, where ice has had millions of years to perfect its architecture, where the very concept of warmth has become a theoretical abstraction. The landscape stretches before you like the surface of a frozen moon. Ice, not in the familiar forms of your own world's winter, but ice as a geological force, ice as the dominant form of matter, ice that has had time to grow and flow and reshape itself according to pressures and temperatures that exist nowhere in your experience. The ground beneath your feet is solid water, frozen to depths measured in miles. But this isn't the clear, transparent ice of frozen ponds. This is ancient ice. Ice that has been compressed and twisted and folded until it resembles marble more than anything you recognize as frozen water. It's shot through with veins of different colors, blues and greens and purples that speak of chemical processes happening at temperatures where chemistry itself becomes sluggish and strange. Your breath forms clouds that crystallize instantly in the air, creating tiny ice sculptures that fall tinkling to the ground, like wind chimes made of frozen time. Each exhalation is visible proof of the impossible cold, air so frigid that the water vapor from your lungs becomes solid before it can disperse. But despite the seemingly lifeless perfection of this frozen world, you gradually become aware that you're not alone here. The ice itself is alive, not in any biological sense, but alive with processes that operate on scales and timescales that make biological life seem frantic and temporary. Beneath your feet, you can hear the slow conversation of glaciers, deep groaning sounds that speak of ice masses, larger than continents, shifting and settling under their own enormous weight. These sounds come from below, from the deep places where ice has been compressed into forms so dense they might as well be rock, but rock that remembers being water, rock that dreams of someday flowing again. The surface ice responds to these deep movements with its own language of cracks and fractures, a network of lines and patterns that spread across the frozen landscape like the thoughts of a mind too large to comprehend. You follow one of these crack systems, walking along a fissure that extends beyond the horizon, and realize that you're tracing the edge of a thought formed in frozen water, an idea expressed in crystalline geometry. The wind that flows across this ice-locked world carries sounds that don't exist in any other environment. As it moves across the complex topography of pressure ridges and ice formations, it creates music, harmonics, and overtones generated by frozen geometries that have had millions of years to perfect their acoustics. You're walking through a planet-sized organ, its pipes and chambers carved from solid water, its music written in temperatures that transform matter itself into new forms of beauty. In places, the ice has formed structures that look almost architectural, towers and arches and delicate bridgework that seem too intricate to be natural. But this is what happens when water has unlimited time to freeze, when crystal formation can proceed without interruption for geological ages. The normal chaotic process of freezing becomes organized, purposeful, creating patterns that follow mathematical principles you can see but not understand. You discover gardens of ice flowers, formations where supercooled water vapor has crystallized directly from the atmosphere into structures that look like roses made of diamond, trees made of spun glass, entire forests of frozen precipitation that catch and scatter the pale sunlight into rainbow fractals. These ice gardens are perhaps the most beautiful things you've ever seen, but they're also profoundly alien. Beauty created by processes that have nothing to do with evolution or adaptation or any of the forces that shape life. This is beauty as a byproduct of pure physics, crystalline symmetries that exist because the laws of chemistry demand certain patterns when water molecules have enough time and the right conditions to arrange themselves. As you move deeper into this frozen world, you begin to notice subtle variations in the ice that suggest this isn't the completely sterile environment it first appeared to be. There are layers in the ice, annual rings like those in trees, that record the slow passage of time in this frozen epoch. Dark bands where cosmic dust settled on the surface before being covered by new ice, creating a record of astronomical events written in frozen water. And in some of these layers, if you look closely, you can see tiny dark specks that might be more than just dust. These could be microorganisms, life forms so primitive and hardy that they can survive in conditions that would sterilize most worlds. Frozen in the ice, like insects in amber, they wait for conditions that might never come again, for warmth that might be only a theoretical possibility. The thought that life might persist even here, in this seemingly impossible environment, changes how you see the frozen landscape. Those cracks in the ice might not just be geological features. They might be pathways for chemical processes so slow they operate on timescales measured in millennia. The variations in ice color might reflect the activity of extremophile organisms that have learned to use cold itself as an energy source. You kneel down and place your ear against the surface of the ice, listening for any sign of activity in the deep layers. What you hear is ambiguous, sounds that might be the settling of geological masses, or might be the slow metabolism of life forms that have learned to exist at the very edge of chemical possibility. The sun, pale and distant in the sky, provides almost no warmth, but its light creates effects in the ice that are hypnotically beautiful. Internal structures in the frozen water act like lenses and prisms, bending light in ways that create rainbows and light sculptures that seem to move and dance despite the static nature of their medium. You realize that you're watching the planet dream. In this frozen state, Earth has entered a kind of suspended animation, a deep sleep where geological processes slow to near stillness and time itself seems to crystallize along with the water. But it's not the dreamless sleep of death. It's the patient dreaming of a world that knows it will eventually wake up, that carries within its frozen structure all the information needed to rebuild complexity when conditions allow. Your time machine stirs again, its quantum fields working against the extreme cold that makes even subatomic processes sluggish. The temporal displacement technology seems to struggle in this environment, as if the frozen state of matter creates resistance to the manipulation of space-time itself. But slowly, inevitably, the familiar shimmer of temporal fields begins to form around you. As you prepare to leave this world of dreaming ice, you take one last look at the crystalline landscape that stretches to every horizon. Despite its apparent sterility, despite the profound cold that makes every breath an effort, there's something almost peaceful about this place. This is Earth taking a rest, pausing in its long journey of biological experimentation to sleep for a few million years. When it wakes up, it will wake up refreshed, ready to begin again the patient work of creating conditions that support complexity and warmth and the eventual emergence of consciousness. The frozen world begins to blur and fade as the quantum fields reach critical coherence. As Snowball Earth dissolves into probability streams, you carry with you the memory of cold, so perfect it became beautiful, of silence so complete it became musical, and of patience on scales that make human endurance seem like momentary impulses. Your broken machine pulls you forward through time once again, leaving behind the world of dreaming ice and carrying you toward another impossible moment in Earth's long, strange story.